In a dimly lit laboratory on the outskirts of a city that had long since surrendered to chaos, Jack Peabody had a problem. He was surrounded by a cacophony of wails, growls, and the unmistakable squelching sound of what was once a group of promising lab assistants. They were now transformed into something less than human, and far more colorful. Jack had just concocted what he thought was a revolutionary new ice cream flavor, a concoction of banana, jalapeno, and something that suspiciously resembled industrial glue. And yet, it had sparked a mutation of epic proportions. Who knew the flavor of the future would lead to the apocalypse? Jack muttered to himself, ducking behind a table as a former lab assistant with tentacles instead of arms reached for him, flailing wildly. The creature screeched, sending a wave of sticky ice cream goo splattering against the wall. It was a surreal scene, like a nightmare mixed with a carnival gone horribly wrong. Jack pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and peeked out from behind the lab bench. "Okay, buddy, let's talk about your feelings," he said, trying to channel the therapeutic tone he'd picked up from an old psychology podcast. But the creature was too far gone, lost in its ice cream-induced rage. Just then, Sophie, his pragmatic friend and reluctant sidekick, burst through the door. "Jack! You've got to stop mixing food with science. Ice cream isn't supposed to have a side of chaos." She stood there, hands on her hips, hair slightly singed from her previous attempt to rescue Jack from the swirling maelstrom of melted madness. Jack grinned sheepishly. "But it's a really great flavor. Just needs a little refining." "Refining?" Sophie echoed, her voice tinged with disbelief as a nearby mutant let out a high-pitched wail, one that sounded suspiciously like a cat being subjected to a particularly bad rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." "What we need is a miracle, Jack. Or at the very least, a way to find survivors." And thus, amid the chaos of rampaging mutants and frozen dessert gone rogue, the duo set off into the desolate streets of what was once a bustling metropolis. They donned makeshift protective gear, a combination of old lab coats, rubber gloves, and a lot of duct tape, looking more like a couple of eccentric mad scientists than intrepid adventurers. The streets were eerily quiet as they ventured outside, the remnants of civilization lying in shambles around them. Jack took a deep breath, the air heavy with the scent of melted ice cream and something akin to burnt rubber. "This is going to be an epic quest," he declared, his voice laced with optimism. "We're like the heroic duo of mutant survival." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "More like the world's worst sitcom." As they navigated through the crumbling cityscape, they encountered their first mutant, a rather rotund creature that resembled a giant, furry marshmallow. It was perched atop a pile of discarded pizza boxes, gnawing on what appeared to be a stray cat. Should we be concerned about that?" Jack asked, squinting at the scene. "Only if we're still hungry," Sophie replied, stifling a laugh. "It seems to be having a good time." With a mix of humor and horror, they pressed on, weaving through alleyways and past overturned cars. As they explored, they stumbled upon remnants of the scientific experiments that had led to the disaster. Old documents fluttered in the breeze, some containing warning signs that had clearly been ignored. "Do not combine. Experimental subjects, use at your own risk." Jack read aloud, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Guess we didn't get the memo." "Let's just keep moving," Sophie urged, shaking her head. "The last thing we need is to become part of the experiment gone wrong exhibit." As they ventured deeper into the city, Jack and Sophie encountered more mutated creatures, each more bizarre than the last. One was a tall, lanky figure with glowing eyes that could only be described as a fusion of a man and a disco ball. It twirled and shimmied down the street, its body reflecting what little light remained in the twilight. "Is that dancing?" Jack blinked in disbelief. "It's got rhythm," Sophie replied, clapping along. Who knew the apocalypse would have a dance party? They cautiously approached the dancing mutant, who suddenly stopped and struck a pose. "You two look like you could use some fun," it exclaimed, its voice strangely upbeat. Jack and Sophie exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or run. "We're actually on a quest to find survivors," Jack explained, trying to remain serious. "Oh, they're around," the mutant said with a grin. "But beware of the ice cream queen. She's got an ice cream throne and a penchant for power. You're best off avoiding her turf." "Right, thanks for the tip," Sophie said, grabbing Jack's arm and dragging him away before the mutant could launch into a full-blown dance routine. "Every corner of this city is just filled with surprises," Jack said, shaking his head as they hurried along. Who knew mutant monsters could be so entertaining? As the sun dipped below the horizon, they found themselves at the entrance of a hidden enclave, shrouded in shadows. The crumbling facade of what was once a community center loomed ahead. "I have a good feeling about this," Jack said, a hint of excitement in his voice. Inside, they discovered a ragtag group of survivors, gathered around flickering candles and makeshift tables. A hodgepodge of humanity, they were a mixture of scientists, artists, and ordinary people who had banded together to form a new society amidst the chaos. At the center stood Mechs, their charismatic yet paranoid leader, who regarded them with a mix of suspicion and hope. "What do you want?" he demanded, his gaze piercing. "Are you here to steal our resources or join the revolution?" "Neither," Sophie offered, exasperated. "We're just trying to find survivors and uncover the truth behind all of this madness." Max's expression softened slightly. "Then you might want to hear what we know." He gestured for them to sit. "We've been piecing together the events leading to the mutations. It turns out the government was experimenting on us, trying to create superhumans. They thought they could harness the power of evolution without considering the consequences." "Sounds about right," Jack said, nodding. "You don't mess with nature unless you're prepared for a wild ride." "And now we're living the ride of our lives," Max continued, his voice growing more animated. "But there's a deeper conspiracy. They wanted to control us, to weaponize the mutations. They thought they could turn fear into power." "Power?" Sophie echoed. "But it's all just chaos now." Max leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. "That's where you come in. We need to expose them. If we can find the original formula, we can prove what they did. We can't let them hide behind their lies." Jack's heart raced at the thought of confronting the truth. "So, what's the plan?" Max grinned, the glimmer of a mad scheme lighting up his eyes. "We raid the old laboratory where it all began. It's risky, but if we can retrieve the original research, we can expose everything." Jack exchanged glances with Sophie. "Sounds like a plan," he said, adrenaline surging. "Just one thing, do we have to wear those ridiculous lab coats again?" With the plan in place, they geared up, donning their makeshift protective gear once more. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, and despite the impending danger, Jack couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. Maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide of this bizarre situation. As they made their way back to the laboratory, the city around them felt more alive than ever. Mutants roamed the streets, but instead of fear, Jack and Sophie were filled with a sense of camaraderie with these creatures, each of them a testament to the unpredictability of human nature. Arriving at the laboratory, they crept through the darkened halls, the remnants of their earlier chaos still visible. The air was thick with the scent of stale ice cream, and Jack's heart raced as they approached the main lab. "This is it," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Inside, they found piles of paperwork, research notes, and the remnants of failed experiments. Jack rummaged through the papers, scanning for anything that might provide clarity. "Here. This might be it," he exclaimed, holding up a faded document. It detailed the original formula, the intentions behind the experiments, and the disastrous consequences that followed. Suddenly, a deep growl echoed through the laboratory. The group froze. From the shadows emerged the Ice Cream Queen, a towering figure clad in a gown made entirely of frozen desserts, a crown of sprinkles atop her head. She was more terrifying than anything they'd encountered yet, her eyes glowing with a frigid light. "What do we have here?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "A bunch of wannabe heroes looking to play in my domain?" Jack gulped, but determination surged through him. "We're here to expose the truth," he shouted, stepping forward despite the overwhelming urge to retreat. The Ice Cream Queen let out a laugh that echoed through the lab. "Truth? There is no truth. Only power, and I hold it all." The room erupted into chaos as the Queen unleashed her minions, mutated creatures that emerged from the shadows, growling and advancing. Jack, Sophie, and the survivors fought back with makeshift weapons, the absurdity of the situation not lost on them. In the midst of the battle, Jack found himself face to face with one of the mutants, a creature that seemed to embody his original failed experiment. It lunged at him, but in a moment of inspiration, he grabbed a canister of whipped cream from the lab and sprayed it directly into the creature's eyes. "Not today, dessert monster," he shouted, a mix of panic and exhilaration coursing through him. As the battle raged on, the survivors rallied together, their laughter mingling with shouts of encouragement. It was a bizarre dance of chaos, one that somehow felt liberating. Finally, with a collective push, they managed to corner the Ice Cream Queen, who snarled in frustration. "You think you can stop me?" she hissed, her frozen crown cracking slightly under the pressure. "Not if we can help it." Sophie shouted, brandishing a spatula like a sword. With a final surge of energy, Jack and his friends combined their efforts, using everything they had, spray cream, kitchen utensils, and sheer determination, to push back against the Ice Cream Queen's reign of terror. As they finally pinned her down, Jack brandished the research paper like a trophy. "We have the truth now," he declared, a triumphant grin plastered across his face. "And we're not afraid to share it." The Queen's expression shifted from anger to despair as the group rallied around Jack, holding their makeshift weapons high. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice echoing through the lab. "Watch us." Sophie retorted, her resolve unwavering. With the final blow, the Ice Cream Queen was defeated, the power she wielded dissolving like a melting sundae. The lab fell silent, the remnants of chaos replaced by a palpable sense of victory. As they caught their breath, Jack looked around at his friends, mutated and human alike, all united in this absurd adventure. "So, what now?" he asked, feeling a mix of exhilaration and relief. Max stepped forward, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "Now we expose the truth. We'll take this research and share it with the world. No more hiding. No more experiments in secret." Jack nodded, his heart swelling with hope. "And maybe we can even invent a new flavor of ice cream, one that doesn't come with a side of chaos." The group erupted into laughter, the sound ringing out through the empty halls of the laboratory. In that moment, it felt like they were reclaiming not just their lives, but also the essence of humanity. As they made their way back through the city, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the precipice of something greater. The world might be chaotic and the future uncertain, but they had each other. And together, they could face whatever came next. Just as they reached the entrance, a low rumble echoed from behind them. Jack turned, and his eyes widened in horror as he saw another wave of mutations beginning to emerge from the shadows. Guys," he said, backing away slowly. "I think we might have a sequel on our hands." Sophie groaned, her laughter turning into exasperation. "Why can't we just have one peaceful moment?" As the mutants surged forward, the survivors prepared for another round. Jack raised his spatula defiantly. "Here we go again," he yelled, the excitement of the adventure igniting anew within him. And so, amid laughter and chaos, Jack, Sophie, and their band of misfits dove headfirst into the next chapter of their wild, mutant-infested journey, united by the truth, ready to embrace whatever absurdity awaited them. As the mutants charged forward, Jack felt his heart race. The air thickened with a mix of fear and exhilaration as the reality of their situation set in. This was not just a fight for survival, it was a battle for the very essence of humanity in a world gone mad. "Stick together!" Sophie shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Jack glanced at her, admiring her courage. In a world filled with monsters, she was his anchor. He clutched the spatula tightly, realizing it had become more than just a kitchen tool. It was a symbol of their resistance. The first mutant lunged at them, a grotesque creature with bulging eyes and tentacles. Jack swung the spatula, and to his surprise, it made contact, sending the creature stumbling back with a squeak. "Take that, you freaky ice cream monster," he shouted, feeling a surge of confidence. Sophie darted beside him, wielding a frying pan like a shield. "Watch your back, Jack," she yelled, deflecting another mutant's advance. It was a cacophony of sounds, screams, laughter, and the clang of kitchen utensils against mutant flesh. The survivors rallied around them, each finding their rhythm in this strange dance of survival. Max was at the forefront, shouting orders and inspiring everyone with a wild gleam in his eye. "This is it. We're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for everyone who ever believed in the possibility of a better world." With renewed determination, the group pushed back against the onslaught. Jack felt the adrenaline coursing through him as he fought alongside his friends, an odd mix of terror and exhilaration in every swing of his spatula. They had turned the tide of chaos into a strange, beautiful camaraderie. In the thick of the battle, Jack spotted the ice cream queen. She had regained her composure, her eyes blazing with fury. "You think you can defeat me?" she screeched, her voice echoing off the lab walls. "I will not be forgotten. Your reign of terror ends here." Max shouted back, leading the charge toward her. Jack felt a surge of bravery. "You're not a queen. You're just a melted sundae in a fancy dress." He flung a dollop of whipped cream at her, hitting her squarely in the face. The moment felt surreal, almost like a slapstick comedy in the midst of horror. The ice cream queen shrieked, wiping the cream from her face. "You insolent child! You'll pay for this!" The battle raged on, and the mutants swarmed like angry bees. Just when it seemed they might be overwhelmed, a new sound pierced the air, a resonant, melodic tone that caught everyone's attention. Jack glanced around, bewildered. "Is that singing?" he asked, eyes wide. From the shadows emerged a group of survivors, led by a woman with a guitar slung across her back. She stepped forward, strumming a cheerful melody that somehow felt right in the middle of chaos. The mutants paused, their aggression dulled by the unexpected music. "What's happening?" Sophie asked, her eyes narrowing. "It's a distraction. Jack realized, a grin spreading across his face. "Keep singing." The woman poured her heart into the song, the notes ringing out and weaving a strange spell over the creatures. Some of the mutants began to sway, their wild movements slowing, as if entranced by the melody. The atmosphere shifted, laughter bubbling up among the survivors as they seized the opportunity. With a rallying cry, Jack and Sophie led the charge. They danced and fought, using their kitchen utensils in a bizarre rhythm that somehow felt like a celebration of life amidst destruction. The Ice Cream Queen, however, was not so easily subdued. "Enough of this nonsense," she roared, shaking off the spell of the music. She lunged at Jack, her icy breath sending a chill down his spine. In a split-second decision, Jack ducked low and rolled away, narrowly avoiding her grasp. "We need to find the formula," he shouted to Sophie, who nodded in agreement. They spotted a cluster of old filing cabinets at the back of the lab, half buried under debris. "Cover me!" Jack yelled as he sprinted toward the cabinets, heart pounding. He yanked open a drawer, papers flying everywhere. His hands trembled as he rifled through them, desperately searching for anything that resembled the original research. Sophie was right behind him, swinging the frying pan with all her might. The mutants were starting to regain their momentum, and Jack felt the pressure mounting. He caught sight of a worn folder, its label faded but still readable: Project Evolution. "Found it!" Jack shouted, holding up the folder triumphantly. But before he could take a closer look, the Ice Cream Queen charged again, her rage palpable. "Give it to me," she demanded, her voice filled with venom. Jack stood his ground, clutching the folder like a life preserver. "No way. You've done enough damage," he shouted, backing away toward the rest of the group. "Together." Max shouted, rallying the survivors once more. "We can take her down." Fueled by the spirit of rebellion, Jack felt a wave of courage wash over him. He glanced at the folder, then back at the Ice Cream Queen. "You think you can control us?" he yelled defiantly. "You're just a memory waiting to be forgotten." With that, they all surged forward, a united front of mutants and humans standing against the chaos. Jack, feeling like he was part of something larger than himself, charged with everything he had. The power of friendship, absurdity, and determination flowed through him as they collided with the Ice Cream Queen. The battle escalated in a whirlwind of movement, kitchen utensils clashing, mutant limbs flailing, and the melody of the guitar echoing in the background. The Ice Cream Queen roared as Jack dodged another of her icy attacks, diving to the side and tossing the folder to Sophie. "Get it to safety," he yelled, as she quickly tucked it under her arm. Sophie nodded, determination blazing in her eyes. "You can't win this," she shouted back at the Queen, as she maneuvered around the chaos, trying to find a safe exit. Finally, with one final push from the group, they overwhelmed the Ice Cream Queen. She stumbled backward, her crown of sprinkles cracking and falling away. With a desperate scream, she dissolved into a cascade of melted ice cream, leaving only a puddle behind. The room fell silent, save for the gentle strumming of the guitar and the panting of the survivors. Jack looked around, disbelief washing over him. They had done it. Against all odds, they had defeated the Ice Cream Queen. "Did we just win?" he asked, still trying to process what had happened. Max clapped Jack on the shoulder, laughter bubbling from his lips. "We sure did. You were incredible, Jack." Sophie, catching her breath, held up the folder triumphantly. "And we have the research. We can expose everything they did." The survivors erupted into cheers, their spirits lifting as they celebrated this unexpected victory. Jack couldn't help but smile, a sense of joy spreading through him. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was hope. As the festivities continued, Jack and Sophie found a quiet corner, away from the noise. "I can't believe we actually did it," Jack said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Sometimes the absurd is the most effective," Sophie replied, grinning. "I mean, who would have thought a spatula and some improvisation could save the day?" Jack laughed, the sound bright and free. "I think we should make this a regular thing, combining science with kitchen utensils." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Only if you promise to leave the ice cream experiments to the professionals." Jack nodded, the warmth of friendship wrapping around him like a comforting blanket. "Deal." As the sun began to rise, casting a golden hue over the battered city, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had a long road ahead, but with the truth in hand and a community behind them, anything felt possible. "Let's get to work," he said, determination etching itself into his features. "It's time to show the world what really happened." And with that, they stepped into the light of a new dawn, ready to face whatever absurdity awaited them next.